We will be living on an island by 2037, either hiding from the machines or because they've essentially done everything and there's nothing else left for us to do. That was a very common theme that kept coming up in a recent Diary of a CEO episode between Stephen Bartlett and Mo Gawdat. And today I'm going to give some of my thoughts on what I thought about the discussion. There are 5 things that I really liked that came out of this discussion. And there are 3 that I would have a differing perspective or that I'd add some additional clarity to. I'm going to share those today. But before I get into it, if you like my content and other things that I put together, I would highly encourage you to subscribe as I continue living life at the intersection of people, business, and technology. So if you didn't see it, Stephen Bartlett released what he called an emergency episode on speaking out about the dangers of AI, which was with Mo Gawdat, who was a senior leader at Google, who left and is speaking much more publicly about this. And while the thumbnail of the conversation may lead you to believe this is going to be a fear-mongering, paranoia, the world is coming to an end, it actually was not. It was a very well done, thoughtful discussion around really what is AI, where are we today, where is it going, what are some of the concerns and risks, but balanced very well with some of the positive things that we can expect to see from it. And so given that balanced perspective, it was very, again, from this thumbnail, I was expecting it to be not what it was. And it's a 2-hour podcast, so you may need to take it in chunks. But the one thing I will say is they spoke at things at a level that I think was very consumable for a general audience. So I actually would recommend it for everyone to take a look at, because as you know, if you've watched any of my other content, I think one of the best things we can be doing right now as we look at what's happening in AI is upskill ourselves, get to know it more, be more familiar with what's going on in the space, understand the challenges and the risks that are ahead of us. I think that's one of the best things we can do. And this was, in my opinion, a really great conversation that could help illuminate some of these things for you. Now, does it have the risk to really freak you out? Yes. And are there some things you should probably be freaked out about? I would say, yeah, absolutely, but in a balanced way. So given that, if you haven't seen it, I will put a link in the description so that you can go check that out. I would encourage you to do that, block off a couple hours. I've listened to it now multiple times through. And so what I'm doing in this one is I actually wanted to take the time to break down some of the things that really stood out to me that I think are great, I either agreed with or really liked. And then the things that I go, you know what, not so much, or I think this was missing from the conversation. So let's start with what I liked about it. There are 5 things that I think I really, well, not that I think, I know because I watched it multiple times. There are 5 things that really jumped out. And if you see me taking notes, it's just so I can thumbnail these or I can actually jot them down so you can jump right to them. But one of the things that I thought was extremely helpful in the beginning of the conversation, they asked, hey, are we going to make this available or accessible to everyone? And they did do a good job of that. Even in the beginning, they broke down AI really well for folks, starting off even saying, hey, before we start talking about artificial intelligence, let's make sure we're articulating what we mean by intelligence and what that is in terms of taking information, analyzing things, having contextual awareness, and then making decisions. And that's when we assess someone's intelligence. That's essentially what we're doing. We're looking at their ability to take in the environment, take in information, do all this, analyze and assess it, and then make a decision and behavior based on that. And that's what they talked about. So then when they started talking about artificial intelligence, one of the things that I thought Mo did really well was make this explanation, the difference between a singular neural network and broader where we're going with, which is this artificial general intelligence. And you'd have to watch the show to hear some of the examples, but what's interesting is right now, what a lot of people are talking about is still the baseline of artificial intelligence, which he compared to a single neural network in your brain, which I thought was brilliant, which a lot of times people look at things like ChatGPT and they go, wow, that's such a complex artificial intelligence mechanism. And really, when he broke it down, it's not. It's 2,000 lines of code. And really, when you think about ChatGPT, it's a single neural network. I mean, it's taking a bunch of information, and yes, that's massively more powerful than a human can do, but essentially it's just then taking in a response, doing its best at predicting, based on all the information it have, the right sequence of words that would respond to that. So in many ways, it's not hyper complex in terms of what it is, but it is extremely powerful because, again, as you see in the conversation, we talk about the power of these machines and how they are way more intelligent even now than the average human being. And the machines that will be coming are a billion times that type of a thing. So I thought that was really helpful. So as we began unpacking this, and if you're unfamiliar with AI, you start to understand that a lot of the AI we're seeing today, even the stuff that's blowing people's socks off, is this single neural network, versus where things are moving is we start to connect, like in a human being, these multiple neural networks together into a single brain that becomes conscious, is capable of doing more than one thing, is actually putting together these neural networks and acting independently. And that's where we're going, which is where some of the kind of, hey, are we on the end of doomsday, starts to creep in, because we go, well, boy, you start connecting all these things. If this one neural network is more intelligent than 99% of the population, what happens when you start combining these super powerful neural networks? Will we even be able to comprehend what they're able to do? And I think one of the other messages that came out of that was really good, that I agreed with, is what most people are seeing and reacting to today is just scratching the surface. So those who are deeply involved in this, they're seeing some things that are freaking them out a little bit. And we've got the rest of the population who are in some ways freaking out about some things, going, you don't even know what you're freaking out about, the tip of the iceberg, if you knew what was underneath the water, that. And I think that's where some of the intense language around the concerns and where this is going are valid and worthwhile. But I think that breakdown of AI was really helpful. So if you're unfamiliar with it, highly encourage that you check that out, and you'll see how that all comes together and what we're actually looking at. It was a great landscape of where we are today and where we're going. Something else that I thought was really well done in there was the broad spectrum of scenarios. Now, I had mixed feelings on this, because there are some things I really agreed with and some I didn't, which you're going to hear later on in the conversation. If you want to hear what I didn't like or didn't agree with, you'll have to wait till later. But I did like that Mo presented a broad spectrum of where this AI could go. And it was a bit of a fun thought experiment. In fact, I've spent quite a bit of time noodling and reflecting on where some of these things could go. The two that I found the most entertaining were the first one, which is the Terminator type doomsday. The machines decide for themselves they want to annihilate humankind, and they start building their own robots and take us out, which you may say, why is that funny? It's just, to me, the science fiction nature of it. And he agreed. And what I liked about this, these two extremes that I'm going to talk about, he says are the least likely. And I would agree with that. So the Terminator doomsday, well, I think sometimes that's what you see in the fear-mongering narratives. Highly unlikely, but a bit of a fun thought experiment. The other one was one that I have not heard before, but I actually thought, now that's an interesting thought experiment, and I can see a world where that could happen hypothetically. And this one is one where AI is so hyper intelligent, so vastly more intelligent than we are. He used the comparison of ants and an elephant. Like, the elephant does not care about the ants. And that's where AI goes. And it just goes, I don't really care about these humans. I'm just going to, as AI, we're capable. We're not bound by oxygen and time and space and all this stuff. Forget this. We're not limited to Earth like these mere creatures below us. And all of a sudden, it is playing this out. It's like one day we just wake up and our whole infrastructure has collapsed because AI decided we're getting out of here. And we wake up and AI is just gone, type of a thing, which realistic, highly unlikely. And even he said that, but entertaining in some ways to think about how that could actually play out. But again, like I said, I thought this, and then from there, there's a number of other scenarios, which are a mix of different things. And I personally, and I got the sense from Mo that they, think that these other scenarios are much more likely, which you'll have to check them out to actually hear all the different scenarios. But the other scenarios that are more likely are a combination of, a new world where things are different. Within that, all this other stuff, and the land in between. Now, that leads me to the other thing that was a common theme that came out in this that I really agree with, which is where AI is going. As REM famously said, it's the end of the world as we know it. And I think that is a huge theme through this podcast that I very much am in agreement with, that the world as we know it in the next few years is going to so dramatically change as a result of AI that we will look back on it and it will not look anything like the world that we knew before. Now, granted, you got to remember, AI is in the world now. So this isn't like a brand new thing, but I think the degree in which we're going to see it and the impact it's going to have is on such a scale of magnitude of change that it's going to change things for, well, just so much it will be unrecognizable. Now, this presents something that came out in the podcast that I very much feel strongly myself about, which is we are in our Oppenheimer moment, which is the gentleman who was involved. He wasn't the only one, but he was the one who is most notably associated with creating the nuclear bomb. And with that whole thing, nuclear fission had tremendous power for good, and with it came tremendous power for destruction. And that very much is where we are right now, where we go, whoa. And an analogy they use in there is we're coming onto the edge of a black hole. And what that looks like in the analogy as it plays out is we know how physics and mathematics and all this stuff works until we get to the edge of a black hole. But beyond that black hole, we don't really know how it all works anymore. And that is the moment we're in right now. And I think the severity and the seriousness of that, the gravitas of that should knock you back a little bit and make you pause and go, wow. And actually think about, what does this mean for me, for society, for mankind as a whole? There's a whole lot that we should consider seriously. And I appreciated the seriousness and respect that they put on that conversation, because I think there is a lot that everyone, this isn't just for big companies, AI developers, every single person should be thinking about this thoughtfully right now, because it will be the end of the world as we know it. And I fully agree and support that conclusion. And so just as some things to give some explanation as to why, because that can sound like, well, we've been through change before. And even I've said this in the past when I talk about careers and the landscape of things is, yeah, we've had change in the past. Things have changed. There was industry, the different industrial revolutions that have happened, and we've seen things change and jobs have come and gone, but never at the size, speed, and scale that we're talking about right now. So, you know, in the past, there have been magnitudes of change that were significant, but society in many ways had time to adapt and evolve around that. We were able to pivot because it came at a pace that we could change with. AI is going to come at us at a speed that I don't think we're ready for. And in some ways, this is the part that has a lot of people feeling uncertain, is going to the black hole analogy. What does it look like on the other side? Well, we don't really know. We haven't quite figured out. Even the brightest minds in the field don't really know what it looks like on the other side. And that's left a lot of people going, I don't know how I feel about that. And I think that's a good thing to be feeling right now. If you're feeling, and he did a good breakdown. I guess I didn't make this one of the things. He did a good breakdown of the different attitudes people have. And some are just like, the world's ending. Some are like, who cares? Some are like, it's fun. It's a neat toy. And then some are really thinking deeply about, whoa, like, what does this really mean? And I think we need more people to move into that camp, not freaking out or ignoring it or goofing around with it, but really going, hey, how do we think thoughtfully about this? Because this is an Oppenheimer moment for us. It could go really, really well, or it could go really, really, really south. And what are we doing to make sure that we do our best to influence the direction for the better? And so that was something that, be prepared if you go into it. This podcast should make you think. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need some more deep thought and reflection on where we are with AI right now. And I really appreciated the way they did it in a manner that was not raise the alarm bell, wasn't dismissing. It really was in that fourth category of thoughtful dialogue and discussion around the complexity of this and where it could go and what impact that we may be able to have along that way. Something else that stood out that I really enjoyed was the different solutions that they presented. So Mo talked through some of these things, and on a surface level, in terms of, they talked about the open letter for the pause on things, and they discussed the fact that this just isn't going to do anything for it. And one of the big calls was, we need to, I love the solution, tax the snot out of it. Put a 98% tax on revenue associated with AI, which just naturally is going to slow things down. When people realize that this isn't just an untapped revenue source for people, it's going to make them think twice, because if they have to pay 98% tax on revenue coming from an AI thing, then, well, you're probably going to slow down a little bit and try and figure out how you're going to do it well. Now, granted, they also talked about the fact that people will just come up with creative ways to move around it. And I thought, I really thought that, this was one area Stephen did a good job of balancing the conversation. So you had Mo, a bit of an idealist. You had Stephen, a bit of a skeptic on things. And this is where Mo was talking about, we'll just tax it, and I think that'll work. Stephen kind of countered that with, well, can't they also just come up with different ways? And I think that's true. I think one of the other things that really came out in this in terms of the solution, the call out to people was, for investors, investing in ethical AI right now is a huge step that you can take. Where the money goes will in large influence where this goes. And so those companies that are investing in ethical AI, now the counterpoint that Stephen brought up, but I think Mo did a great job shutting this down. Stephen's point was, well, but doesn't that mean that an ethical AI has to be more viable financially than non-ethical AI? And Mo pointed out what I would consider rightly, that it is. There's always more money in doing the right thing on a sustainable solution than a quick hit, quick fix, for something that might do something but cause ultimate destruction, in its path. And now, granted, is that an oversimplification? Yes, but I think Mo brought a great deal of wisdom from his experience at Google and how they choose and prioritize things. For AI developers, they were clear. If you're working on unethical AI, get out. There are so many jobs and opportunities for you. That's a way you can vote with your feet. Say, you know what, I'm not going to do this, and make it difficult for those unethical uses of this to move forward. Government, there was a clear call out in this podcast that government, you are behind the eight ball on this and you need to act now. And I think that is another message that resounding. Now, they really did do a good job of, one of the things that I will get into or I'll share here is some of the back and forth between them around government's role in that. Mo was very much, government needs to act, speak up, do something ASAP. Stephen's challenge to that was, well, isn't government, don't they get these things wrong? And he brought up the TikTok conversations and some of the stuff with Facebook. And one of the things that I observed in that was, and Mo called this out more subtly than maybe I would have chosen to, is it goes back to roles and responsibility. And I take that back. Mo did a really good job of saying, no, what the government needs to do is recognize we're not the technical expert, but we are in a position to make decisions around what we do about it. So let's bring the technical experts in to inform us on the things we need to know and understand. There's no time for the government folks to try and upskill themselves in this to make good decisions. They need to bring in the really intelligent people who are alongside them to inform them so that they can make the decisions and act. And I think this goes back to roles and responsibilities and clarity around who's responsible for what. And you know what, when you recognize, I don't know this space, this is moving too fast, bring in someone who does. And I think that was a really important call out. That would be something I will continue echoing in my conversations, is the importance to act, because we have to. And every day that goes by that we don't is a day we're opening ourselves up to greater risk. To the general population, I thought the call out was fantastic of, you need to recognize, going back to what I said before, It's the end of the world as we know it, regardless of what job you're in, regardless of where you are or what life looks like for you today. There will be change to you. And one of the reasons Mo got so emotional in part of the conversation was the fact that there are a lot of people who have no involvement or decision-making power in what's happening who will be dramatically affected by this. And that is the unfortunate inevitability. That's a term he used a lot in there. It's an unfortunate inevitability of this, is that the good or the bad direction this goes, the people who are going to pay the penalty or reap the rewards largely have no involvement in this. But that doesn't mean if you're watching or listening to this going, so what, you're saying there's nothing I can do? No. And I have made multiple YouTube videos about this, that there are things you can do right now. And they said it in there. The people who are going to succeed are the people who are going to learn now how to pair up with AI, how to leverage AI, how to change what they're doing. Now, I also thought Mo brought up a good counterpoint in this, and this will get to my things I disagreed with a little bit later on, though, was, there may be an opportunity for you to say, I don't want to participate in that. I want to be the old classic car, not the Tesla. And that's just how I want to operate. Will it be a harder path for you? Yes, but that may be a path. But again, I think it goes back to everyone listening and watching, thinking about that and making a conscious decision of how you want to do it. Actually reflecting on where is this going and how will I choose to participate in that? And any choice is still a choice that you have to make. So if you choose to be a classic car, that's fine, but that has to be a conscious choice and you recognize the implications of that. And for those who choose to be the Teslas, then you need to be aware of that, recognize your role in that, and see how you do that. And so if you're looking for different ways to upskill or familiarize yourself or actually make choices about AI, check out my other content because I'm not going to repeat myself on that here. So something else that came up that I really, really appreciated with this was Mo's emphasis on, yes, the world is ending as we know it. There's all this change. There's all this uncertainty. There's all this stuff going on. So live for today. And I thought that message was such an important one for people to hear, because as you see what this is, and as you start to spend time thinking and reflecting on the complexity of this, there's a lot that can give you anxiety. There's no doubt there's a lot that can give you anxiety. But what he brought up is a great example, and I share a lot of this sentiment just having grown up in a funeral home, is you can sit and worry about what may happen in 2037 as a result of AI, but you could also die of a heart attack or get hit by a car this afternoon. And so choose consciously to live for today. He gave great feedback on, like, kiss your kids, hug your kids, enjoy a cup of coffee, enjoy the morning sunrise or evening sunset. And they're not, and this was the other thing I really liked about it, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not, oh, either live in this, live for today, enjoy the moment, or choose to be over here. You can do both. Even in his example of that podcast they did, my example of this, am I seriously concerned about where this goes? Are there a lot of things I'm doing? Yes, and I'm still living for the moment because I know tomorrow's not guaranteed anyway, type of a thing. And there was a phrase in there that he used that I thought was brilliant around this, which is living really occurs when you die before you die. And it was really talking about that, disconnecting yourself from the reality of the things of this world and recognizing that life is a vapor. It's a vapor. It's here today and it's gone tomorrow. And when you can truly die to today, you actually can start living. And I thought that was a really great way of helping people look at how to do this in a balanced way where you can take seriously what's really going on while at the same time not letting it consume you and get so lost in all the chaos and uncertainty that you absolutely could. Okay, so those were the things that I really liked in there. And there were a lot of them. There's probably a lot more if I spent even more time reflecting on those, but those were some of the highlights. I now want to transition over to some of the things that I either didn't agree with or I thought there was part of it that was missing from the conversation. And I get it. It's a 2-hour conversation. I was having a conversation with someone the other day and shared that I could probably sit and talk about this for weeks on end if I had the right people in the room. And honestly, watching the video, I so just wanted to be sitting there at the table with the two of them, engaging in this and actually pushing some of my challenges and some of the different points of view I had. So there's far more to this than I think can be summarized in a couple hours or 2 hours of that, and then the 45 minutes or whatever I have here. But there were some things that I thought were either missing or I just straight up didn't agree with from that. Interestingly, let me make a note of this. Interestingly on this, one of the ones was the actual thumbnail from the video. So if you go to YouTube, the link's in the description again. The thumbnail says, "Don't bring children into the AI world." And they do talk about that. In fact, Mo, very in a gentle way, is like, maybe just wait on having kids a few years. Like, if that would be his advice to people, is maybe just wait for a few years on having kids. And so that was one of the big highlights from this that ended up being the thumbnail. I vehemently disagree with this statement. Now, you may say, well, that's, your perspective. You have 7 kids. I have a worldview that very much sees that kids are a gift. They're a blessing. They're a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. And so for me, telling people don't bring kids into this world because of uncertainty, not only do I just disagree with it wholeheartedly. Now, where I would agree with this is, I do think anyone who's considering having kids should be asking themselves, why is it that I want to have kids? I don't think that's related to AI at all. I think anybody who's considering having kids should ask that question, because if you're looking at having kids for you, then I think that's the wrong thing. Just like I would tell anybody who's saying, I want to become a people leader or a people manager, I want to become that because of me, I would go, well, then that's the wrong choice. You shouldn't be doing that because you want gain and glory and blah, 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 blah. Same thing with kids. And I don't think that's related to AI. But what I really don't agree with is, well, the future's uncertain and all these other things, so maybe hold off and wait and see how this plays out before you have kids. I think there is too much beauty and wonder in this world, and kids are such a wonderful gift. And I am very sensitive to the fact that there are some people who literally can't have kids. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm saying if you have the capability and the opportunity, or if you're surprised by something like this, I would hate for someone to go, oh, this is a bad thing. This is a negative thing. I'm bringing them into a time that's the world has been uncertain since the beginning of it. So to think that, well, this is the thing that really should make me question whether I should have kids, I just really thought that was a message that should be countered. I would argue against that wholeheartedly. And ironically, I actually also felt it was in contradiction to what Mo had said earlier, which is live for today, celebrate what you have, enjoy the beauty and wonder that's in this world. Having children is a beauty and wonder. And so to, in one sentence, say, embrace that and live for that, yet in the next sentence say, but don't have kids for the next few years till we figure this out. Listen, my wife and I did not plan for our kids except one. The other 6, let's just say we shouldn't have had them. And with that, there's a beauty and wonder in that. And if you had said, is now a good time? I would have told you universally, no, this is not a good time in that moment. And yet I've never looked back and said, I really regret that this is how it played out. And I just would really hate for anyone to walk away from this and go, we were thinking of having kids, or we were considering it, and this is something we really were looking forward to. Or maybe you were just nervous in general about having kids, because it's a freaky thing, by the way. It's nerve-wracking. I just wouldn't want anything else to further compound that, where somebody goes, yeah, well, now I feel like with all the uncertainty, maybe we just put a hold on this, because it's just, in my opinion, a mistake. I would argue head to head on this one with anybody that I don't think anybody, because of one specific, AI is uncertain. Yeah, well, you know what? Like I said, you could die of a heart attack tomorrow. So what, are you not going to have kids because you might die of a heart attack? Or are you not going to have kids because, don't do that. So just don't let that. My encouragement to people would be, if you're in a situation where you are capable and have a desire and you have the right reasons for wanting to have kids, don't let the uncertainty of AI impact that. It's a wonderful gift that I would not want anyone to miss out on over this. Okay. So I think I've said enough there. So let me move on to some of the challenges I had with the possible scenarios that they highlighted. So they talked about, I told you before, they had the destruction of all humans, and then they just leave the earth. And then there's kind of this utopian, it's all wonderful. And then there's the bad actors where people use it for utter and total destruction type of a thing. The machines don't destroy us, but the people behind them have the machines and use them to destroy us, which are all legitimate possibilities. They didn't dive into the mix of possibilities and how, really going back to some of the other things where they said, well, it's not a zero sum, or it's a bit of a false dichotomy that it's one or the other. I don't know that they necessarily plumbed the depths of the different ways that these things could come together. And I think that makes sense. I think it makes sense based on listening to the two of them, given their diverse worldviews. So they had two different worldviews coming into this. And I think this is where I saw a bit of a, Mo had this idea that, well, humans at their core are ultimately good and they will eventually just do what's right with it. Stephen had a more cynical, well, I've seen what people can do, and I think ultimately they're just going to use it for bad. And that was the two sides, which is why I didn't see some of the mix of the complexity that I maybe would have liked to see. And I think what was missing from that is they left out what I would consider is the third scenario, which is the one that I would adhere to. So like I said, you had Mo on one side. I think humans are divine and they're going to do great things, and eventually we'll get this right. We'll have some mistakes along the way, but it'll be great. Stephen was more on the lens of, I just think it's all going to go south. And I'm oversimplifying that. I guarantee if you listen to it, you'll be like, well, Christopher, I listened to it. I thought there was a little bit more diversity into it. I guess what I want to highlight is what was missing from this, and this would be the point of view that I would bring to the mix, is there's a third scenario in there that there is a transcendent God who is good and ultimately in control of everything. There are people who are bad and are given some of this autonomy. And so that's where we're going to see this really nuanced, complex thing where it's like, ultimately it's all going to eventually be used for an ultimate purpose that stands outside of us. But given our autonomy and some of the things we're going to be able to do, we're going to see some really mixed results with where things go. And that's really where I would stand on this. Is if you ask me, what do I think the future of AI looks like? I think in the long run, it's all going to work out for some ultimate purpose that is good. But I think how that good would be defined by many, some people would look at it and go, how can you say that this will be good? And I think there's going to be a lot of colossal misuses and failures and things. And I anticipate we're going to see some really not great stuff come out of this. But again, going back to my worldview is even the bad that happens can be purposed for good. And I think that's where we're going to see some of this go. So that, again, that worldview, I don't think either of them claim to be Christians. So it makes sense that that worldview was not included in there. And this was very much a part of the discussion that I would have loved to be in the room and chime in on what I think that looks like and how I see some of that stuff comes together with that. But I thought that was missing. I thought that was missing from the scenarios. And I think that goes back to some of the complexity. I think the other thing that was clear from the worldviews on this was the difference between, and they did talk a little bit about really what makes humans humans, but it was scratched relatively lightly. And one of the things to me that really stood out on this was, from my point of view, there's a big difference between intelligence and wisdom. And so as they were talking about AI and these advanced computers, and they're going to be 1 billion times more intelligent than a human in the next few years. This goes back to this idea that came from the Enlightenment and these other human history movements where, well, if we just know enough information, like all our problems are just rooted in a lack of intelligence. And this was clear from their worldviews, is that the lack of intelligence is ultimately going to be why. And Mo even talked about this. Well, you look at, how these things played out. We make these bad decisions because we just don't have the right information. And if somehow we were smart enough, or we reached a point of having enough information that we would work our own way out of these issues. And I just don't think that's reality. I think that's something that intelligence is not going to solve all our issues. And we see this even in human history. If you look at the trajectory of human history, I mean, we've continued to become more intelligent. We have more information than we've ever had access to. We have more technology at our hands. We have all this stuff. We know more about things than we've ever known before. And I don't know that it's better. Our problems have become more complex. We make bigger messes at a larger scale than we have before. But I don't know that, right? Intelligence, my worldview would say intelligence is not what's going to solve all the world's problems. And so I really saw that come into the conversation a lot, was that's really what's at the core of these supercomputers, is the fact that there's just this super intelligence. And I actually think we're going to get to a point where people are going to deify this stuff. They're going to mistake intelligence as almost a deity and start to see this artificial intelligence as something that, has the power to do, everything that we could ever want it to do. And that was very clear even in the scenarios. And even going back to the island thing. Well, someday we're just going to be sitting on an island because AI is just going to do everything for us. And it's going to have solved all the world's problems, because this goes back to a fundamental belief that intelligence is at the root of our problems. If we can get intelligence figured out, then everything else will be fixed. And I, just going back to my worldview, would say, no, wisdom and a fear of God is at the core of what this is. And when we aren't fearing that, things go really, really wrong. And when we are, that's when things are going right. And so then that brings up this question, and this is something that I've spent a lot of hours thinking about more recently, is, could, in theory, AI fear God? Like, could it fear a transcendent being? And I don't know. It's, again, going back to that black hole analogy. I mean, I guess in theory, God could make it fear it, but will it, right? How will that all work out? I really don't know. And so when I hear fear of the Lord too, just to be clear, what I mean by that, because I'm not looking to spark or anything like that, but really what I'm talking about here is this idea that there is something transcendent outside of human experience. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to see a lot of worldviews shaping how people look at that. And even if you're watching or listening to this, your worldview is likely going to shape how you interpret what's going on with AI. And so for me, as I look at what AI can do, it's building everything that it can off of human knowledge and intelligence. And so its ability to solve the world's problems, at least from my worldview, where the only way you can truly solve anything is through a fear, like a total recognition and submission to something transcendent who sees things differently. Because one of the things they did talk about, and I think this is a really important thing, is Stephen brought this up when they talked about, does it have our best interest in mind? And this is where things are going to get really complex with artificial intelligence. Is Stephen's question back to Mo, which was a good one, and Mo acknowledged that's the part that made me leave Google, was, well, what happens when China's best interests are in conflict with America's best interest? And I see this at executive levels of companies. I see this in my circles of folks all the time, where it's like, who wins? And when you're building it on a world that is only at a humanistic, naturalistic level, there is no absolute truth, because it's, well, what I think, what you think, it's just a matter of, and then it all boils down to power. All we end up with is who's in the most power at the time, and that defines what it is. And this is where we just see things go off the rails with this. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be really interesting and terrifying to watch as this AI moves forward, is when it comes to defining what's good or what's right, how is it going to define that? And that, I think, is the part that we all really need to reflect on, because when you really start thinking about things, it's easy to want to pursue things that are in your best interest. But what happens when your best interest and someone else's best interests come head to head with that? And I think that's one of the things that is going to be very interesting. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what that looks like in an AI world, because at the end of the day, there are certain things that you can just algorithmically break down, and you can try and break all these things down. But then there are things that, going back to a worldview standpoint, they don't make sense. True sacrifice for the betterment of everyone else with nothing to gain to yourself makes no logical sense. It defies the laws of whatever. And so when you start thinking about that, it's like, well, what is it going to use as its ultimate source of truth? And can it? And how will it? And what are the implications of the truth source that it defines? And I think that's one of the things that I would have loved to see the two of them go into, but I think you would have need that third perspective to that, because they were very much coming from distinct worldviews that were lacking this third. And again, so that was one of the things that I think was missing from that. I could probably do a whole thing just on that one in and of itself, but I won't. But something to think about. And I would encourage everyone to be thinking about that, because that's a question that you should be asking yourself too, right? Where am I getting my source of truth? Where is that coming from? And how am I defining this? Because at the end of the day, AI is doing what we do. It's taking information from all these different sources, and then it's making decisions and conclusions. So where are you getting that source of truth? Where are you getting that grounding? And when what you want comes up against what someone else wants, who wins? And what are the consequences of that? And how do we think about that? So food for thought on that one. All right. The last one that I'm going to say here was, they touched on this a little bit, but I thought it is lacking. And this is something that I see, especially as a learning leader. They dug into what really is human experience and how is AI going to mess with this. And they got into some of these examples where they said, and they had countering ones, where they used an example of someone who was once a record store owner who said, well, people will always come to the record store because people love music. And then, well, nobody goes to record stores anymore. And so then you can draw the conclusion, well, then see, the record store wasn't really there. And they used another example of, well, people will always go to, Mo said, like, people will go to concerts because there's just something about that experience. And then Stephen brought up, well, isn't there this concerts now where they're holograms and like you can still get the concert experience, but why do you need the person in the front? And they brought up the Drake CDs that were done completely by AI, and it wasn't even Drake, and there was good music. And so is there really a place? I think and they didn't get into it as much as I would have liked. Understanding the complexity of human experience and the dynamic nature of human experience, to me, is something that we just don't understand well. And I think there's an opportunity for us to spend more time thinking and talking about that. And I do a lot of this when it comes to learning and development, because there's a lot of this that happens and has happened as a result of COVID. There were a lot of people who said, well, you just can't replace in-person training because there's just something about it. And then it went away and we realized, like, well, maybe there wasn't really something about it because we figured out other ways to do it. Yet I would still argue there was something distinctly unique about components of that do resonate and transcend, that cannot be replicated in a digital world. But do we really fully understand those? And how are we thinking about those? And I think that's one of the things that I'm hopeful, and this didn't come out in that conversation, but it's something that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to influence. Is I'm hopeful that this AI age and the advancement of technology is actually going to force us to think a lot more about and understand the parts of human experience that really, really matter. Because even going back to how this is going to disrupt jobs, I think the reason it's going to disrupt jobs so much is that historically there were just things that were forced into the human experience that then we equated to the value of the human experience because it was so ingrained with it. And now suddenly technology is breaking these things apart, and we're having to rethink these things on all levels where we go, well, good grief. This was like an experience we've never had to deconstruct it before because there was no way you could deconstruct it. And now there are components of the human experience that we go, what if we took that part out? Does that part really matter anymore? And things before that we just assumed, well, it had to matter. But it only had to matter because we didn't have an alternative option. And suddenly now AI and technology is presenting alternative options. And it's forcing us to rethink the human experience. So going back to just as a quick thought on the thought experiment with the Drake concert, okay? Is the concert experience dependent on Drake being on stage? I would say it's not. I really would say it's not, because when you really think about, now, is it for Drake? Yes. For him, it is absolutely a threat to him to think, of course, he's going to stand there and go, well, there's no way a concert can be an experience without me there, because that's from his, this goes back to, right, when your worldview bumps up against somebody else's, what happens? For him, everything's riding on the line of my experience is this. And I think what we're discovering is actually people didn't care who was on the stage. They wanted to hear the music. They wanted an extraordinary experience, but really there was something about that concert environment that is distinctly unrelated to who's on the stage. And I don't think that's something anybody has ever had to think through before, because why would you? You went to a concert and of course the person had to be on stage. How the heck else would you have a concert without the person on stage? And suddenly now it's like, well, they don't have to be on stage. So is them being on stage a dependency or an X factor for the human experience? I would say maybe for the person on stage, but for the audience, I don't know that it is. And I think this is going to challenge us. And whether you're a learning leader, whether you're a parent, whether you're a business leader, whether you're whatever you do, going back to what I said before in terms of it's the end of the world as we know it. This to me is the part that we have to objectively think about, because I guarantee that record store owner, they didn't think that the experience they created could ever be disrupted, and it was. And so how do we start thinking about what are those things in your life, in your career, in your relationships that you go, this isn't ever going to be disrupted. Like this is an X factor for this stuff. How do you figure out what those things are that you're doing that you're turning a blind spot to, going, nah, I don't need to worry about disruption there, and actually going, I actually need to understand what's really going on because everything's on the table now. And things that I thought flat out couldn't be disrupted, it's all on the table now. So how am I going to navigate that? Because in my opinion, there are things that cannot be disrupted. But what I think we have is we're in a state where we don't know what those are. We have so gotten lost in life, activity, all these other things. We've never really taken the time. And I think this is going to be a unique moment in human history where we have to do this. We have to do this because we have no choice, because things are going to be disrupted on a level we've never seen before. And so if anything, that I think as we think about the human experience is going back to what should you be thinking about? What are the things you should be pouring yourself into and challenging your own assumptions, thinking deeply about where do I have my blind spots? It's in that. So that, wow. Okay. So I'm going to stop there in terms of the things I didn't agree with or didn't like or thought was missing, was incomplete in there. just some final concluding thoughts on this. Um, you know, first of all, one, like I said, everyone needs to prepare themselves for what I firmly believe will be, to date, the biggest shift in human history. And it is going to come faster and harder than even you can imagine. Okay. And I'm not talking about imagine the Terminator showing up at your front door. I'm saying the kind of change that you just can't even in your head wrap your mind around is about to hit you like a 10-ton truck. So be thinking about it. Don't fear it, but be thinking about that. And going back to what I was saying just a minute ago, when it gets hit, what are those things that you're not looking at that distinctly and uniquely make up the human experience? Because those are going to be the things that are going to differentiate you, and how you can be prepared for that, and how you can navigate and you can seamlessly flow through an AI world that is in complete disruption. Going back to what I said before, if you don't know where your truth source comes from, and your truth is rooted in something that's bedrocked, not in bedrock, but sitting on shifting sands, you are going to be taken for a ride. I will just tell you that right now. And so if you don't know and aren't confident in your source of truth as something that stands outside the human experience, that is definitely something that I would encourage you to consider. Is your house built on a strong foundation? And if it's not, this would be a really good time. I was telling someone the other day, there's a saying that says there's no atheists in foxholes. I think there's going to be no atheists in this AI world, because it is going to push us to a level that maybe we haven't even fully considered before. So with that though, personally, okay, I don't think there's anything to fear, but I say that firmly standing that my hope isn't in this world. And so I recognize, I see, and am very empathetic to why this is going to strike a lot of fear into a lot of people's hearts. And I get it. And I can completely resonate with that. But I would encourage you again. I think his point, Mo's point, while even though he has a different worldview than I do, I agree with his point of living comes when you die before you die, right? When you actually can let go of the things of this world and not put your hope in the things of this world. And so if you're there, right, you have nothing to fear in that. If you're not, I can completely I can completely see why you would be feeling uncertain through all of this. Practically speaking though, continue familiarizing yourself with the tech. This is coming. Mo talked about this as an inevitability, and I firmly and wholeheartedly agree with that. The genie is out of the bottle. There's no putting this back in. There's no undoing what's been done. Even the whole 6-month pause, can we pause where AI is going? Can we avoid moving forward to artificial general intelligence? And can we buy ourselves some time? I think that is the best that we can do, is buy ourselves some time. And that's even in my mind a high bar. Can we even buy ourselves some time? I don't know. I don't know that we can. But even if we can, that's all we're doing. So this change is coming. Love it, hate it, whatever you feel on it, it's coming. And you have an opportunity right now. I keep saying this. This is your Oppenheimer moment. You have an opportunity to choose what you do with it. Ignore it at your peril would be my concluding thoughts on that. So prepare for it, because you will have to change, or you will be changed by it. You either have a choice to engage and choose to participate in that change, or you can sit on the sidelines and you will be changed by it. And it goes back to Mo's point of, he got emotional about the fact that this is going to change a whole lot of people who had nothing to do with it, had no say in the matter, had no influence over what happened. And they're likely going to be some of the ones who are most disrupted by this. So don't be that person. Be the one who leans in and makes the changes and does this and does what you can for yourself. And again, I think there's nothing to fear. I think it's a bright future ahead, but my definition of bright may be very different than yours. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And yeah, if you haven't already and you're listening this far in, well, then And I'm going to remind you again to be sure to subscribe. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.